Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our roundtable this morning to discuss data centers. Thank you all for attending. For the record and legal process reasons, today's discussion is about overall data center policy only. We're not here to talk about any specific data center project or site. As a reminder, no applications have been received. Instead, we are focusing on how Sedgwick County should legislatively address data centers through potential updates of the unified zoning codes and the comprehensive plan for the entire area of the county. I'd like to thank all of my colleagues for attending this morning and would like all the commissioners to please introduce themselves now, starting with Commissioner Meitzner.
Pete Meitzner, Commissioner for District 1, which is basically the north of Kellogg and east of Oliver. North of Kellogg to the boundary and east of Oliver to the Butler.
I'm Ryan Beatty, County Commissioner for District 4. Good to be here and welcome everybody.
And I'm Jeff Blueball, Chairman of the Sedgwick County Commission, and I represent District 2, which is Southwest Sedgwick County.
I'm Stephanie Wise, the Commissioner over District 3, which is the western half of Sedgwick County. Happy to be here. Thank you for everyone's attendance.
Commissioner Jim Hell for District 5, which is southeast, Kellogg to the south, and essentially the Ark River to the east. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioners. I appreciate your time here. Before we do general introductions, I'd like to invite Caitlin Gruenbacher, who requested this roundtable discussion during public comment at a commission meeting a few weeks ago, to introduce herself, say a few words, and then have the rest of her group introduce themselves as well. Good morning, Caitlin. Yeah, just push the button so you see the green light.
All right. Good morning. My name is Caitlin Gruenbacher. I am a resident out in Western Sedgwick County. My husband and I currently run a third generation family farm where we are raising the fourth generation. I'm also a part of the group that's been working with our community to inform everybody and try and just get a grip on what's going on and what could be coming to our community, the changes it could be bringing to our community. And just give hopefully everybody a voice at the table. So thank you so much for coming today. We appreciate you guys all coming here to have what we hope is going to be a very positive and constructive conversation.
Bart Eck, 30420 West 29th Street, Garden Plain, Kansas. Again, a citizen interested in learning more and helping educate the community on any potential developments.
Hello, good morning. I'm Craig Lubers, also a resident in Garden Plain in Western Sedgwick County. I'm here for that perspective and also just having a background in, I would say, economics and statistics. And when I'm not at meetings like this, I work out at Koch Industries. I'm a vice president of finance at their Koch Ag and Energy Solutions. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig.
Name's Sean Eck. I live at 2942 North Cardington, but grew up in Andale. Retired agronomist, worked with SurTech, Charmin, and CropQuest. Been working with growers locally, regionally, internationally for 6 years.
Thanks, John.
Mike Benson, I live in St. Mark on 29th Street. Trained as a chemical engineer. KU graduate. Worked 35 plus years for a large multinational company, lived overseas, built plants, actually was in businesses that supported the electronics and the chip industry, and spent my whole career operating high hazards facilities across the globe.
Thanks, Mike.
Good morning. My name is Joe Shear. Live in Colwich, 19129 West 53rd North. Been in business for 40 years in operations, been over $1 billion company and multi-million-dollar companies, and now I own my own company. So very interested in what's going on out there. So I appreciate this time this morning.
Thanks, Joe.
Patrick Krause, former CFO of an oil and lubricant company, 40 plus years in accounting and finance.
Thank you, Patrick. So now I'd like the rest of the group to attending today to introduce themselves with a short description of their background and knowledge regarding data centers. And I know that Mr. Hughes has a short presentation to make on behalf of the state commerce after introduction are done. Good morning, Andrew. Would you like to start?
Happy to, Chairman. Thank you. I'm Andrew Nave. Good to see everyone. I'm the Chief Economic Development Officer for the Greater Wichita Partnership, which is a nonprofit regional economic development organization, and also have the pleasure of serving as the outsourced and contracted economic development team for the Sedgwick County. We serve a 10-county area, and so we work across 7 different industry sectors. IT systems and support, I'll talk a little bit about that when it's my turn, is critical to one of our fastest growing industry sectors. And so my perspective will bring an economic development and kind of an industry perspective for growing our economy. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Andrew.
Morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. My name is Dr. Chris Olson. I have a PhD in environmental health sciences, and I work right across North America. I'm a consultant. When I come to work every day, it's working on either large infrastructure projects, renewable energy projects, battery storage projects, the like, and then more recently data centers. I've actually worked in Kansas you're going to hear some of an accent there, perhaps. I'm out of the Toronto, Canada area, but I've spent the last 12 years here in Kansas working right across the state on both energy projects as well as transmission. More recently, we're getting into the data center side of things. And so if anything that I can provide in terms of, setback distance, sound, public health, safety, welfare is my role here today. And Andrew asked me to come, and I happen to be in town anyway. So glad to be before you folks.
Thank you, Doctor.
Good morning, everyone. I am Ebony Clemens. I have the privilege of managing the economic development process for Evergy in both Kansas and Missouri. Have an opportunity to work with our lead economic development agency, Commerce, as well as local economic development organizations such as Andrew's for the Greater Wichita Partnership. And our main role and responsibility, as you know, we've been serving Kansas since the early 1900s, and excited to be here and share about the things that we've done. One of the things, if you don't mind, if I'll just for a second, we've tried to get ahead of all of the things that's happening around data centers and the conversations, and we've taken some proactive leadership roles in this regard. Kansas was one of the first states to enact and create the tariff for the LLPS, and Missouri was right after that. So we did that at the end of last year around October and November. And there were some certain protections that were put into place with that LLPS that I think is very important, that protects ratepayers like you and I. So for these large data centers, and I know that Kevin and everyone will kind of speak to this, but data centers is kind of a catch-all phrase. So there's so many different sizes, right? So it depends on the type of data center you're talking about. Evergy has been serving data centers for decades. It's a part of our attraction process. So along with manufacturing, aerospace, logistics, data centers is a part of that conversation. So we've been serving them for a number of decades and been serving them well in the communities that we've partnered with them immensely. So as we go around the table, if you guys have questions about our LLPS and those protection, I'll be glad to share a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Evan.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Colburn. I'm with High Touch Technologies. I currently serve as the Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer. So I oversee our cybersecurity operations. We have a couple of smaller co-location data center facilities here in Wichita and in Texas. And so I'm not experienced on the hyperscale side, but I'd be happy to talk about the smaller data center infrastructures. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Good morning. My name is Tanya Witherspoon. I am a lifelong Kansan and 30-year resident of Western Sedgwick County. My husband and I have 5 children and 5 grandchildren. My background is 30 years in the tech industry. I worked both at LSI and NetApp in chips and storage for data center production. I've also taught and led programs at Wichita State University in technical workforce and technical education. I am currently working with the state of Kansas to install Kansas's first internet exchange point here in Wichita, which is part of our digital backbone that the Office of Broadband is creating that connects the Free State Middle Mile with Kansas City, Missouri's internet exchange point. So I'm here to give background on data centers, their use in industry and workforce and economic development around that.
Thank you, Tanya.
Good morning. I'm Steve Castro Miller. Probably 40 years in technology roles in a variety of different places. The last 28 years here in Wichita. I've worked in a variety of companies from very small, two or three employees to Koch Industries as well. So hundreds of thousands. I've been on both sides of investment and customers for data centers across the country. And I also, 40 years ago, married into a family of ranchers. And so I have a great deal of care about our land, our aquifer, our way of life, and the way that we do neighborliness around the state of Kansas. And so I'm honored to be able to be part of a discussion. And I hope that I'm able to be part of a conversation around, can we invest in tomorrow in a way that that might use our resources, but not abuse our resources? Because to me, that's a really important piece. I also want to send a signal to our students that are here that we are forward looking in multiple dimensions, and that to the rest of our region that we're business minded as well as minded about the other things that are important part of our economy.
Thank you, Steve. And thanks again to everyone. Before I turn it over to Mr. Hughes for a short presentation, I'd like to remind everyone that there will be additional opportunities for discussion, including the Planning Department's public meeting on next Tuesday, March 31st. It's at 4:30 p.m. at the K-State Research and Extension Office at 21st and Ridge. I don't think the meeting starts till 6, but the doors are open at 4:30. And the meeting will include a presentation on current zoning rules and what we've explored so far. And our goal is to open and respectful conversation that helps us develop good policy for all Sedgwick County. So before I turn it over to Mr. Hughes, do I have any comments or anything from commissioners? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Hughes. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner and members of the commission. Thank you for having me today. I'm opening up my PowerPoint deck here to share this with the audience. I want to apologize in advance. I'm getting some network bandwidth error messages. And so I turned my camera off just to help with that. And let me get this presentation started here and we'll dive in. So are you able to see the PowerPoint, the Kansas slide currently?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So for members of the audience and for those on the panel today, my name is Paul Hughes. I work for the Kansas Department of Commerce. I first entered into economic development in 2016 in Arizona. And there we were working on data centers and power again in 2016. And as you might imagine, working on water in the desert, we often borrowed the phrase from Mark Twain that whiskey was for drinking and water was for fighting. And since that time, even though they're in the middle of the Sonoran Desert and their populations since it exploded over 7.5 million people, the state still figured out how to become a top 5 market for data centers. And it's not because they were making more water, it's because the technology, the cooling technology changed. So when we're talking about data centers, the key thing to point is that they come in many sizes, and the tendency is to kind of throw them in one bucket, but they're very, very different from each other. A smaller data center in the 5 to 10 megawatt range, many of those could actually fit inside of a shipping container. And if you see a shipping container within the confines of a substation somewhere, the chance is excellent that that's a small data center being a local business. And at the other end of the scale, we see much larger projects with hyperscalers, but the way this industry really describes themselves in their power use. So when you say how big is a discussion point, they generally characterize themselves in terms of megawatts. And so as you hear from our power providers today, they're going to be talking about it in terms of large load. That's what they're looking for as it connects to the grid safely and reliably. And so you'll hear numbers in that 10 megawatt to 75 megawatt range as being considered a large load. And then these hyperscalers you'll see would be 100 megawatts or larger. So what's going on inside of the data center is also important, especially as the community is considering any sort of local benefits they provide to the project. understanding what's important to them will enter into the equation. For the hyperscalers, they're replacing the equipment inside of the data center on a 2-year or 3-year cycle. So them having a sales tax exemption, which is provided under SB 98, is important to them, because on a $2 billion data center, better part of $1 billion of that is just the equipment. At the other end of the scale are the co-located data centers. They tend to be smaller in size, in that 50 to 100 megawatt range. And you can characterize them almost like either a condominium complex or an apartment complex, where the building and the property is owned by an ownership group, but what goes on inside of it are individual and privately operated equipment. So the energy cost is important to them, but it's not a key driver, because that's passed through to those that are leasing space. And the equipment sales tax exemption is less important to them, because the property owner doesn't own the equipment, the individual companies in it do. So it's the beginning of a complicated conversation, but I wanted to break this down because each time we have a conversation about a data center, you'll hear me ask, what size is the data center? It's an important consideration. So as we take a look at what's occurring in Kansas today, we get the question a lot, where is this surge coming from? What's causing this? And the tendency is to want to point to one single element that triggers this. But what you'll see on the map here is evidence that Kansas is actually very late to the data center growth pattern. And it took time to build infrastructure, and that lateness actually has some benefits to it, particularly when you're talking about applying lessons learned in other markets, has allowed Kansas to apply those lessons and take action that actually makes it a leader in the country in terms of making sure that who comes into the state as a data center is a safe data center. We heard mention earlier of the Wichita Internet Exchange Point. Part of the backbone and infrastructure that it takes to support this industry and others, quite frankly, whether it's our educators, members of the public, but there's been extensive investment in broadband in the state, much more to be done. But also in terms of infrastructure, the Southwest Power Pool recently approved a decision to improve some of the transmission lines in the state to carry 765 kV power loads on them. It was a decision that they initially considered in 2007. So even back then, they saw that there was a power curve coming. And for cost reasons, they decided not to do it then, but they see the need now, and we'll be making those investments. Also occurring in Kansas recently was passage of SB 98 in our last year's session. And for those unfamiliar with SB 98, it provided the sales tax exemption on the equipment that the hyperscalers and larger projects are looking for. There's a minimum requirement of a $250 million capital investment in the community to be eligible for the program. And as a first in the nation, Kansas requires these operators to go through a process with the Intelligence Fusion Center, which is an office under the Attorney General's office. And their mission is, quite frankly, threat assessment. And what they're looking for is to make sure that whoever's connecting to the grid with these loads is doing so safely, that they have full control, and by control I mean cyber control of their facilities, that the security measures are in place, and that a large load couldn't be weaponized in some way to help bring down the grid. So they're using military grade software and other assets to get to the bottom of who the operator is and the equipment that goes into the data center. And in SB 98, there's a communication that there's a requirement for a water plan, and that the Department of Commerce cannot articulate incentives to the client until that Intelligence Fusion Center process has been completed. So it's a very real inspection, close inspection of who's connecting to the grid in the community. The other thing that we're seeing that's opening up smaller markets in Kansas is previously you would see calls for in older technology, there would be calls for 1 million gallons a day or 2 million gallons a day for water. And those were the old evaporative systems. That large load of water often came with a large wastewater requirement. And so it just wasn't a good fit for small communities that didn't have that kind of infrastructure in place. But what we're seeing now is the cooling technologies improved dramatically, which makes smaller markets viable in the state. And for many of the smaller markets, this is the first real economic development opportunity they've seen in years. So there's a balance that we're trying to strike here and just helping explain to people what's occurring in the state. So as we're taking a look at where Kansas ranks today nationally for data center markets, you'll see that going from 10 to 20 data centers is going to feel like a lot. Going from 20 to 25 is going to feel like a lot. But the reality is we're being outpaced by a number of states, and they're seizing the opportunities that we hope to bring to Kansas. One last thing on the surge, if you will, there's a good amount of speculative development being proposed in the state. The concern there is that they're assembling land, they're trying to gather commitments from the community on water, gather commitments on power, without really having a client that is designated to go into that facility. And so through a number of processes in the state, including Evergy, they got a great arrangement to make sure that who's coming into the state is real. They've gotten tired of chasing phantom projects, as have we. And so as we're working on these data center projects, we also want to make sure that the project is real. As we take a look at the data centers, what often gets overlooked or isn't well understood are the benefits to the community. These data centers generally take about 24 to 30 months to build. And so as the hyperscalers, at least at the large end, are doing their construction, it's generally one, possibly two buildings that stretches this construction window out to about the 6 to 8 year time frame. So there's a lot of retail and restaurant tax collections. There's hospitality hotels that they're staying in. There's a big tax generation component to this before they've even opened the doors. Once they're operational, there's a tariff that many communities charge for their energy consumption. It's a big boost for some of these smaller communities that don't have this type of consumer in their community. I'll leave it to Evergy to explain how a large load actually helps with operating and maintaining power delivery to the community. And what we're seeing for these data centers is that the responsible operators want to become a part of the community. They want their employees to be proud, like anybody would, and they want to make sure that they're addressing community need when they come in. And they will often ask you, what does the community need? And they'll make those investments before they've even broken ground on their data center. So be open to that kind of conversation as you're discussing the data center entering into your community. They want to hire local talent. The types of jobs that they're looking for generally range in the $65,000 to $110,000 a year range. It's everything from HVAC maintenance, it's electricians, it's plumbers, it's server technicians and supervisors, you name it. It's full spectrum there. But they want to hire locally, and they are willing to make the training investments to do that. They do not have an interest in trying to bring people from outside of the community into this location. They want to hire the people that are happy and are already there. And this type of opportunity is arranged in a way to where the permanent hiring doesn't overwhelm a community's housing availability or traffic patterns or anything like that. So it's a big boost to the community coffers without necessarily putting a huge load on street and housing infrastructure. So it begs the question, what is the reaction then to data centers in Kansas? And a lot of people are unaware that Kansas law requires data centers to pay for their own infrastructure. And despite that, they may see their bills increasing, but it's not due to the data centers. That's an activity that you'll see primarily in unregulated markets. And again, I'll leave that. I'm overstepping on Evergy's piece here, but I'll leave them to explain the importance of being in a regulated versus an unregulated market when it comes to rates. The other concern that we hear is we do these workshops. We've done probably 15 of these across the state now. Is we hear this concern that, you know, we don't want to become Virginia, or we don't want to become Texas and be inundated with these data centers. And the reality is that Virginia, Texas, California, Arizona, for that matter, having a large data center population there was a part of a deliberate strategy to support and attract technology companies to their states. That doesn't happen by accident. These sites are extremely difficult to find. And it's important to understand that one coming into a community doesn't mean that there's 100 that come into the community. It's quite the opposite. My hunch is that as we see them coming into the state, one of them tying up power and water, it just won't allow for it to become a mega site, if you will, for data centers. The other thing that we see in this reaction is not only that there's speculative developers tying up or attempting to tie up resources, it's how they're going into the communities. They tend to be more aggressive because they're trying to outmaneuver and outflank the data center operators who are kind of overwhelmed with this need. And so it's the approach that they're taking, quite frankly, that can be a little crass, and it upsets the communities, and the speculators don't know who's going to occupy the data center yet. So it rubs raw the question, well, who's coming into the community? And the reality is they can't answer that question yet. So when we're talking about confidentiality, this is something that's an expectation of every project we work on. We just had a conversation here in Atlanta at the Site Selector Guild about this issue of confidentiality and what it means to these clients, some of which are publicly traded companies. They don't want people making investment decisions. They don't want their corporate strategies being revealed as to what markets that they're looking at. And that's true for data centers. It's true for automotive manufacturers, you name it. But where this is different in data centers is in how they seek out sites. They will first go to the power providers and ask, where is this load even available on the grid in a stable and sustainable location? They'll get an X on the map saying here is where you can get it. They start their contact with the local landowners, and that is the beginning of the community communicating about the project. And so, but they don't know who it is. The anxiety starts to rise as to who's coming into the community. And this topic of confidentiality doesn't do much to ease those concerns. And so we have to understand that we're coming in at the very front end of the shaping of the project for data centers, where ordinarily we would put that at the end of a project preparation. We have it scoped out. We know what it is. We know where it's going. We know pretty much everything about the project to where it's appropriate to reveal to the community leaders, this is what it is, and this is what they're asking for. And data centers, we're running into that in the front end, which is way too early in the conversation. They don't even have it scoped yet. And it's worth knowing that in this two-year and 3-year equipment refresh that they do, when they're talking about a data center that's going to be operational in 2028 or 2030, the equipment that's going into it hasn't even been produced yet. So they generally don't know what's going into the building. So it's very early in the conversation. I just want to ease some concerns that it's not an attempt to sneak anything in by any measure. The reality is that it's important to maintain confidentiality at the beginning of the project, and that's what they're each going to ask for. I think the last concern that we hear, last on this slide, that is that communities are realizing that they don't have a master plan. And so the reaction is often, okay, well, let's stop this until we can figure out what we're going to do with data centers. I actually applaud the effort of planning for the community and making a strategic pause, 90 days, 120 days, to assess where do these fit in the community. But it needs to be a broader part of a broader conversation about just, industry in general. Where would you want an automotive manufacturer to go? Where would you want a composites airframe manufacturer to go? It just requires a map, and working with the community on designating.
Hey, thank you very much so far in your presentation. Do you mind if we go ahead and start opening up a little bit of discussion, unless you got any other key points you want to make quickly?
To be quick then, I think that I just want to address the topic of water. This is probably the area of greatest misrepresentation for projects that are looking at Kansas. The larger data centers that we're looking at are committing to closed loop systems and air cooled systems. And the concern is that I see is whenever we see or hear stories of somebody saying they need 1 million gallons a day or 3 million gallons a day, it tells me they're talking about really old technology. It's not compatible with the requirements of SB 98, which includes a water plan. So as we're talking about the data centers, not only is it important to know what size the data center is, it's important to know what kind of cooling technology that they're using in the data center. We've got a number of projects looking in the state. This is the general size range that you'll see from 12 million to 7 billion. And as we're being asked what communities can be doing to prepare for this, I would lead with asking for a cost benefit analysis. There's a sample of this that's available in the room today. And what I implore is that you just ignore the financial figures in there. That was just one potential scenario that we ran. What we want people to see is there's a great deal of detail that can go into these financial assessments before the community makes any commitments. I'll leave it at there, Mr. Chair, and open up for questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to start out, commissioners. Commissioners, do you guys have any questions? Okay, I'm going to lean on you guys. Somebody have a question?
This is Mike Betson. I have a comment. I hear about the old technology. That's true. It is old. It's been around forever. It's still being used. It's being used in new plants. So this concept that everything's closed loop, not necessarily true. Go down to Tulsa. They're using the Ocean River. And they said they're not using the water. It's from prior. There's 2 projects on the books that are going to take 3.3 billion gallons a year out of the Neosho River. They're using evaporative technology. That's their publication. I found this in February. Okay, so this is where people get a little bit anxious. You can find it. Now, that may not be what we're going to be doing, but they stood out there and said, we don't use water. They don't pull it out of the ground. They don't pull it out of the system. They're pulling 3 million gallons a day out of the Neosho River. And the state-owned industrial park, Mid-America Industrial Park is the name of them, are permitted to pull up to 27.2 billion gallons a year. So my point is that old technology is still being used. And this thing about saying it's not out there, somebody told me one time it's verbal gymnastics. But the other thing is, and it depends on how you want to design your plan, people do supplemental evaporation. They'll talk about adiabatic cooling, understand it, I can explain it, but it uses water. So the devil's in the details. Having to know what those assumptions are. So I just want to put that out there as we go forward in these. And I think the Kansas regulation about it needs to be closed loop is exactly right, especially in our area.
Do you have a question or?
My question is, Why do we keep saying everything is the old technology is not being used when it's being used?
Okay, Paul.
And I got more examples.
But
Okay.
yes, so just real quickly, I did say it wasn't being used. I said it was really old technology. And that the
Being put
improvements
in
in the,
new.
and may I finish? The issue in Kansas is that in SB 98, we articulate clearly that a water conservation plan is a requirement in order to access benefits under that program. So without that water conservation plan, 1 million gallons a day is not conservation. What we're looking at are these closed loop systems. We're looking for air cooled systems, and even some of the more exotic systems where the servers are in direct contact with the cooling gel. So that's what we're looking for when we're going through this process. Something that's on that wavelength of 1 million gallons a day tells me that they're tone deaf to the state that they're entering into. But we've made it quite clear in SB 98 that if they expect a welcome sign at the city limits, that they can't be a high water user in Kansas.
That's right. That's the policy we need to have. We agree with that, but we need to get down to the other next level.
Okay. Thank you. Yep. What are the questions? Okay. If we don't have any other questions, thank you very much. Caitlin, I believe you have a presentation as well. Okay. I'll do the same thing about conventions and I can ways. They have questions. Paul, I don't know if you're on here still, Paul. Can you send that presentation to the commissioners?
Happy to do it, sir.
Have you guys seen that? Okay, I don't know if all the commissioners have seen that.
I'll send it now. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, Craig, thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna jump in here. I think I've got a few slides here. I would call it a presentation and hopefully open it up for a good discussion overall.
Thank you. Okay, so we thought it might be helpful to at least declare why we're here and who we are and what our mission is more than anything. So I apologize, I will read this verbatim, but our mission is to drive rational and strategic growth of Sedgwick County and its rural agriculture-based communities. This consists of responsible economic development and advancement that aligns with the community's goals and economic trajectory and the Sedgwick County Comprehensive Plan. And maybe for those unaware, the comprehensive plan mentions, advancing community safety, quality of life, and as well as attracting and retaining future generations overall. So hopefully that adds clarity on kind of what our key goal is as we stand here. And I'm going to jump into maybe some key things that we've done from a community perspective for the area that we represent. I will spare you with listing off every single thing that we've done and hit you with just the larger items, right? We've had local town halls in Colwich and just a couple of days ago here in Garden Plain. And then obviously driven some other community awareness discussions and engagement overall. Now, I will say, when you think about it from the current community response, I would say the primary beneficiary in our area, or the purported beneficiary of any projects, would be the Renwick School District. And basis their research and what they've learned, they've already approved a direct letter of opposition. And as a reminder for those that don't know, and maybe this is my background and just trying to do some research and statistics, the Renwick School District is the fastest growing school district in the county and any counties around in the last 5 years. There's a growing property tax base there. It's self-sustainable, it's successful, and a key reason that they know what kind of makes sense for their vision and why they've put in that direct letter of opposition for any hyperscale activity in the area. On top of the Renwick School Board, the Andale, Colwich, and Garden Plain cities all have either submitted a letter of opposition or are pursuing extraterritorial jurisdiction actions in their area, as well as local townships. I won't list them all, also taking similar action. So in short, every elected body is pursuing action, including Senator Blasey himself and others that have pushed state legislation or attempted to. And again, to be clear, with their research and what they've done, and I appreciate Paul's comments, but it does not fit the vision or the strategic alignment with where we're going. So I'm going to keep moving here. Some concerns, I'm going to add some. Paul mentioned some of these. I'm going to add some others on concerns voiced from the community. And Mike mentioned some of this, but on the water risks, we believe that there's just continued misconceptions and mischaracterizations around water, electricity bills and impacts. There's a number of studies out there, recent studies in the last 90 days, 120 days, that mention key risks to the consumer. And even though there has been policy and legislation created in the state of Kansas, it does not cover all of the risks that the consumer would be exposed to at that point. Community safety, right? It's everything from just the size and scale and magnitude of these sites, traffic, roads. I won't list all the details there. Noise pollution, not only from what you hear, right, but also from an infrasound perspective. These are the things that we continue to hear from the community. Air pollution. I would say this. I have great concerns on the job and economic uplift impact, and some of the information that has been put out there, I think, has been misquoted and again mischaracterized on what actually drives impact to the local community. Tax abatements for the big tech companies. Again, there's already the sales and use tax exemption for 20 years. Plus, I believe what's on average, again, not here, this has not been done in Sedgwick County, but in other areas, on average, around 75 to 90% tax abatements for companies that are worth trillions of dollars, right? So again, these are major concerns of the community. Hyperscale clustering, we've been told that this doesn't happen, or hey, it's been a choice in certain communities. But I think when you look at, Virginia gets used in Texas, but when you look at what's happening also in Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Mississippi, there's a lot of that happening as well. And it appears to lack strategy, and it's more of a path of least resistance for a lot of these companies on where they can put them in. Property value impacts, technology obsolescence risks. I'm not the expert there, but the problem is I don't know that anyone is the expert on what this is going to look like in 10, 15, or 20 years. And then lack of overall perceived strategy. I think from the community's perspective, and I know everyone in this room is working really hard on this, but for them, their perception when we go from there's not a pause to there's a pause for 90 days and we're not going to extend it. And then there's a 55-day pause. And then the best is for a year and we might extend the pause a little bit. I think it just seems that there's just a lack of overall strategy from the community's perspective. And it's just a concern of theirs to know what can we expect as we go forward. And I have a separate slide on transparency concerns, but there's just a number of things within that. I don't know that these are in any particular order or anything, but just these are the things that our group here at this table hears a lot from, I would say, the hundreds and now thousands of people in the community that we also get a lot of emails ourselves. Okay, I'm going to keep going on the community transparency concerns. So the first one here, little to no communication from companies and groups despite ample opportunities. I do appreciate what Paul says, and no one is expecting details around the specifics of a project plan or anything, but hyperscale data center is not brand new. What they do and what they could possibly bring to the community, plenty of opportunities for the companies and other advocacy groups to come and just hold a town hall, educate. Some of us have barely learned about this for 60 days. We all have full-time jobs and we're trying to find time to do that ourselves. And that's what that second bullet shows is just, hey, a lot of that communication has come from the community members to try to educate the public, which again is nothing that we're seeking accolades on. It's something the public is very frustrated about and the lack of information that they're getting. Also, I understand the NDAs has been let's say a norm in the industry or for similar projects, but I think we can all agree this is one of the biggest revolutions of our lifetime, or if you listen to some of the CEO texts, possibly in all of human existence, things that require a lot of change require change everywhere. So what used to work may not work going forward. So NDAs for requests for local officials, public servants, it just is awful optics for the public to see that, especially when a lot of these projects require public utility, public infrastructure work from that perspective. It is just something that, again, very, very much frustrates the public and us overall. I would say for our community specifically, I can't speak for the county on this fourth bullet, but a lot of this, the community, they have an irrational fear of the future and what's going to happen. They don't know this, they don't know that, but they do. They've had interactions with a similar company on a similar project a few years ago, same schools, same families. And I will not get into the details, but a lot of the tactics that were used at that time has been enough for people on the school board, people on city councils to say, we're tired of the tactics and the lies. We're not going to deal with that. So there's there's history there versus just some fear of the future. And I will say there's not a lot of documents out there. I do think one of them that's been out there has been from the Kansas Commerce Department on can't remember the exact title, but the Mythbuster and Fact Finder. I do take exception to some of the things in there. I think there are some facts, there are quotes, but there are certain convenient facts left out. And I would go as far as say even mischaracterization of quotes that are out there in that to help drive a perception to the public that I don't believe is real. That again, the public is simply looking for answers at times and not just to be told what people think they want to hear. And that is a bar that has not been crossed yet or achieved by a lot of these any documents that have come out. I'm going to stop right there right now. I'm going to go back to, well, actually, let me go to our position and then we'll go back here. So I will read this verbatim again. So overall, an extension of our mission, the AI tech revolution and new infrastructure in the form of hyperscale data centers will require a level of policy and community transparency that has not been needed or required on any economic development seen before. So with that, our position is that the combination of several risks on the consumer, community, and environment warrant the need to pursue these developments in pre-existing industrial and brownfield locations that meet the prior mentioned mission that I had on my first slide. So those are the extent of our slides. I think we have a lot of points and discussion we want to make. So I don't know, with the team here, I'll go back to some of the concerns here and if there's anything that we want to make sure that we're getting across overall.
This is Mike Betson again. The NDAs, they're important. Don't get me wrong. It's just that I've seen a couple of these NDAs. You brought them for me to take a look at them. You basically can't do anything. They are so encompassing. There's not confidential information. You can't talk about anything. They're written legalese. They're hard to read. You got to read something. The point is, it should only be restricted to really critical information, such as a technology or something like that, or who you purchase, that kind of stuff. Not for the general site plan and things of that nature. That's just, there's a reason they do that. And yeah, that's been a practice in the past. That doesn't mean you keep doing that going forward. Industry has been challenged on a lot of things and they've had to change. This is one of them again. You can't hide everything behind it. You gotta have open stuff. You want to buy it. Responsible companies will do it right. That's all I have to say. I've been through many NDAs in my career. Even with the Chinese government, so it was fun.
I do want to address the NDAs. If you don't mind, bring our county councilor up here, Justin Wagner. But because your request is to ensure that none of the public servants, public electeds are signing NDAs, or is your concern more that NDAs happening out there between landowners and developers? Okay. I've served in local government for 15 years. I've never signed an NDA. I've never been asked to sign an NDA. I haven't asked each of my colleagues, but I've never heard of you, any of you. Commissioner Meister, have you signed an NDA? Mr. Beatty? Mr. Wise? Mr. Howe? Nope. Okay. Justin, yeah. Okay.
But I would say it is, but it is a typical practice in the hyperscale industry to request NDAs. And yes, the landowners, as Mike said, but also for other city council members. And again, I'm not in other communities and other states. And I guess part of the point here as we work through it, if we're trying to put in responsible growth in the county, if there's a way to enrage the public, it's things like that. That's not helping the cause to do that is kind of the point.
I think we can move on from that one because we're not signing them and yeah. Okay.
I will hit one point here. I think we have this, Caitlin. And again, this is just me, my background, I think in economics and research. And as I read all of the documents, and I'm referencing the Kansas Commerce Department Mythbuster. And again, the public wants to be educated appropriately, right? And with the right answers. Now, one thing as I read through it, this is on the job side. So there's a lot of concerns we're going to talk about on the rest of our time here. But in that document, it references, this right here. And hey, according to the CBRE research, each direct job created in the data center industry generates an average of 7.4 ancillary jobs across the broader local economy, right? So that's from their report, and I know, and here's where I get frustrated. That has now been shared in the REAP conference and shared with the public. It's been set at the listening town hall. How can you be against this? It's creating local jobs, local job growth, and in the economy. And here is a document put together by State Department, state officials to educate the public to get away from misinformation. Now, the problem when you read all this and you go actually to those sources and you go to the Wyandotte Economic Development Council, the actual quote is that according to CBRE, direct jobs in the data center industry create an average of 7.4 ancillary jobs across the broader economy. And when you go to the actual CBRE document, it's 7 jobs across the entire United States. Nothing to do with local. There's nothing put in there at all for, say, the local county, local city, or anything. So the point is,
on this point, do you mind if I open it up to see if anyone's got any comments or questions on it? 'Cause I kind of wanted to get some dialogue going back.
sorry, just one quick point. My point is not just about water pilot, but on this example, for a document that was put out by State Department to educate the public on a myth buster, to completely mischaracterize a quote from academic research that has now been quoted by others, is a great way to not get any trust from the public on anything. So it's one example that, again, any document that comes out from this point is going to have an extremely high hurdle and high bar. And I think everyone around this table has a responsibility of high integrity to make sure that if we're trying to educate, we can, because that is an egregious mistake. And I hate to say it where I work, for things like that to be mischaracterized, that's where people lose their jobs. That is not appropriate to kind of show that those jobs would be local and they're not. So
Is it, anyone like, Andrew, would you like?
Yeah,
to-
I'm happy to try to respond to that. Craig, I don't think you're wrong in the sense that these taking words out of context matters for sure. I can't speak to the specificity of the state's document. I've seen it obviously, and I know of the Wyandotte County and CB Richard Ellis real estate firms reference point. I haven't read those studies, so I can't speak intelligently about the word choice and the semantics of the words they use. But I agree with you that there's a distinction and a difference between national, broader, and local. I agree with you that that changes, that subtlety changes tone. I guess the perspective I would offer, or the reaction to that I would offer, would be this somewhat speaks to the complexity of a conversation like this. We're dealing with really hard, complex, detailed issues, and it's hard to do that even in a, whatever the Kansas document is, a 4-page document, 6-page document, whatever it is. It broadly speaks to, as an economist, it broadly speaks to an economic impact study. That's using base economic theory we use here locally, and the Sedgwick County Commission uses the Center for Economic Development and Business Research at Wichita State to do those economic impact studies. We all learned base economic theory in freshman econ, and that's where this is derived from. It's a combination of indirect and induced jobs. I agree with you that there's a range of impacts. I've seen it as low as 2 all the way to 9 or 10 jobs that the data center industry creates an economic impact. That's why I reference 5 or 6, a middle point, because I'm not 100% confident in what is the exact right term. But to get to the level of geography, I guess, whether it's national, broader, or local, I would say that the vast majority of your economic impact is going to be local by the nature of what that economic impact study does. It looks at indirect jobs. So not just data center, an example, but the suppliers, the vendors that serve that data center, that's an indirect job. And then also calculates in induced jobs, which would be the spending that comes from data center employees or from contractors, those connected to a project like a vendor. Their spending goes up. When their spending goes up and they live in that area, they're spending more money at the restaurants. They're buying a bigger apartment or the next nicer home, or they're buying a vehicle. That generates more wealth, more income for companies that potentially could add to jobs as well. So it's absolutely an imperfect science. Base economic theory has been around for a long time. But I agree with you that the word choice matters. I don't know the specificity. I think there was just for brevity trying to make a point. But when we're talking about very complicated studies, I think some of the time that's some grace is needed to kind of understand what we're talking about.
I appreciate the additional thoughts. My couple quick things. I don't think it's for brevity when they added words versus took out words. The other thing too is on the 7.4 jobs, the thing that gets lost in so a lot of things matter, right? There's the statistic, the source, and the context. The context gets lost in this, where the entirety of that article is based on Loudoun County, Virginia, where yes, that may have been a choice, right? But the majority of those 7.4 jobs are in the construction side. Nothing wrong with construction jobs, but it mentions how those jobs are there for the continued build out and expansion of additional data centers. So my point is that context matters tremendously when you think about this. So we can't use a statistic to make one point, but ignore the other side of the clustering angle, when I think many other data points show that the GDP growth on the economic side, Andrew, is not near to the extent and possibly zero versus what gets kind of shown to the public on this side. So my caution is this: if there's a playbook to try to get data centers in Sedgwick County, this is not helping whatsoever. And it is absolutely egregious error that is setting everything back from, I'm sorry for anyone trying to push it. So
Commissioner Howell.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Craig, for the point there. I agree that it's frustrating to see this type of spin, but I don't know that it actually matters. We know that it's going to create some jobs. It's going to have some economic input, but that's really not why we're even here today. If no matter what that number is, we know it's something positive. It's a positive number. If it was 2 jobs, if it was 5 jobs, we don't know what the number. This is not about a data center in Sedgwick County yet. This is about regulations about it. Should one come to Sedgwick County? What are the regulations we need in place for us to have a data center in Sedgwick County? And I think this is actually a rabbit trail. It's not going to change the regulations it brings in or would prohibit a data center in Sedgwick County. This is not a major point. It's simply a point that you're talking about their spin. People are manipulating statements to create favor, if you will, on their side of the argument. And that may be true, but it has nothing to do with what we're here today for. This is about water and energy and setbacks and noise and pollution and all those issues. I don't know that how many jobs it creates is really a major point here today.
But public trust matters too, is my point.
I understand that. There's so many distractions in this conversation about the myriad of reasons why. Again, the arguments are so many arguments, but we seem to never get to the issue of what does this commission feel about water? What's our position on water? What's our position on energy? Why can't we knock these things off this list? That's where the conversation needs to go at some point. And I wish it would go there sooner than later, because almost every email I get, that's what they cite. We can't seem to dispense those major arguments. We can talk about these other issues if there's a data center that's presented in Sedgwick County, they'll talk about how many jobs there's going to be, or whatever type of tax situation, or kind of economic impact at some point. Those things will come to us at some point. Wichita State might even do another study that's local to Sedgwick County at that point. That's not unusual to see that happen. So to use a wind-out study about some other state is really not that helpful to me. I see your point. I feel like my frustration is we're spending so much time talking about stuff that frankly doesn't really matter. We can't seem to get to the stuff that does matter. The water is a major issue. Why can't we get that off our list by just making a decision? What are we going to do about water in Sedgwick County? Let's get that conversation going. Thank you.
Nope. Sorry, one more point and then I'll sit down. I agree. Let's get to the other topics. The reason I brought that up is back to the public's frustration with little communication that's been out there. That's the only document that's out there that has those things in it. So to your point, if there were several other items and things from state departments or the pro data center advocacy groups, I'd be a lot less worried, but that's the only document that's been used so far to kind of educate them. And that's why it's a concern I want to bring up to this group that I think should be aware from the public's perspective on how they feel.
Commissioner Brady.
Yeah, no, Greg, that concerns.
Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. The concern is well received, so we appreciate that point, and I would agree with you largely on that point. When we talk about policy, to Commissioner Howe's point, we have to analyze community risk, which is water, environment, noise, setbacks, all of these things, and community benefit. I agree that spending a lot of time on the job creation probably isn't as valuable today, but one point that is valuable in community benefit is the property tax implications. Can somebody give us an estimate of what we'd be looking at in property tax realization annually from one hyperscale data center?
Okay, I'm happy to take a stab at that, Commissioner. So hyperscale term is fairly ubiquitous, but let me say it this way. Based on current mill levy rates and assumptions for value of construction. I think everyone knows and would recognize that these structures and these facilities are generally expensive, highly valuable for Class A industrial buildings. So they're not your $100 a square foot metal shop. Using a rule of thumb of $300 a square foot for an industrial facility, which would be a high-end industrial facility like a data center, and a small data center in the hyperscale category, like Paul talked about, at 500,000 square feet, you're looking at $175 million of appraised value. You're talking about $40 million of assessed value. So at a standard mill levy rate, you're looking at $5 to $6 million of annual property taxes
On a low end.
on a low end data center. Now, that assumes a lot. So just take that for what it's worth.
That's helpful.
But just knowing how valuations work and how property mill levies are applied, a small data center could generate several.
I think that's helpful. And I think what the goal of today is try to get as much accurate information out as possible to dispel myths, to build more trust, to bring people to the table. And that's an element in community benefit that has to be discussed, is what is the tax benefit to school districts, to cities, to the county, to fire districts and such. So that's helpful. I know you can't be exact in it, but I think that's a helpful range.
Andrew, does that, maybe you mentioned and I missed it. Does that take into account any abatements then, or that's no abatements?
Yeah, no, that's the value of the building. That was not.
So typically abatements are given. I think you heard the number from 75 to 90%. A lot of times abatements are given. It's very common across the US to do that. In fact, a lot of the numbers, the calculations they've done have shown its cost in the form of sales tax exemption and abatements at a cost of $1 to $2 million per job created. Because remember, the number of permanent jobs are not that many.
But that would be a policy decision for the county commission.
Yes, correct.
Not an industry standard or such. Just what is industry standard may not be a standard in Sedgwick County.
Right. But I'm just making a point that that's typically what happens to attract them to an area.
It has in the past. I would agree with you, Pat, that a lot of abatements have been applied to data centers in the past. Yes.
Can I just add, you talked about the mill levy and things like that, but from an energy perspective, one of the benefits is, and this may not apply here, but the franchise fees, right? On a basic 5% franchise fee, a basic data center that may be 100 megawatts at 85% load factor will bring in $2.5 million a year.
Can I ask a question on that, actually? So does that apply only to data centers that would be built in the city limits, or does it also apply to the rural county?
Just wherever the franchise fees are.
So in the rural county, do we have franchise fees?
No, you do. No, we do not.
Okay, so that would not be a benefit if it is not built within the city limits.
There's a sales tax that's charged on utilities, so it gets more complicated than that. But yes, you're correct. There's no franchise fees in unincorporated Sedgwick County.
Okay. Well, and I'm trying to work with staff to see if we've got any kind of ballpark estimates on property tax dollars, but I guess if.
No, I'm happy to ask some questions if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dr. Olson, I'm really glad that you're here today. I'm glad everybody's here today. Let me just be very clear, but I have really wanted your feedback on some issues. Obviously, I think water and what we're going to require from the state and what we're going to require here is a question. If we required in policy air-cooled systems, if we said this is the only thing we're going to do in Sedgwick County, does that alleviate our water concerns?
So Commissioner, is it Beatty?
Yes.
Okay, Commissioner Beatty. Yeah, I mean, I think the water issue is a very complex issue. I mean, back to Mike's point and others, and there still are water cooled systems, of course, out there. I think what it comes down to when you look at bringing it back, kind of tying it to your ordinance, right, and your creation of an ordinance around these types of issues, is you may not want to restrict yourself to any one particular system, because who knows what tomorrow's going to bring and what the next thing is going to be, but it's that responsible development of whatever type of system that they're going to bring in. So air cooled, yes, air cooled is now becoming more prevalent in some areas. In other areas, there's an abundance of water, so we're still doing the water cooling and the like. And I think it's having around again with SB 98, where they have to bring in a water conservation plan, all of those issues. Regardless, even for an air cooled, there is going to be some water. There's going to be water required for the administrative buildings. There's going to be water, for hand washing, urinals and the like, all of that. And so one way or another, I think you want a water balance report that would come along with anything to the county. So in the ordinance, I think if you look at the state legislation, you look at local, when you're trying to decide on what to do with Sedgwick County in the ordinance, is requiring any company and development company coming in to provide you what their water balance is, what their water plan is. And then ultimately your staff, right? I mean, you certainly, having been in front of your planning commission in the past here, a couple of years back, you're a large county with a large staff and a very well educated staff in these issues, and that they can review those types of reports. And it may be that, that I'm not setting, I could care less what the technology is that these folks bring, as long as it's done responsibly. But then you could have and request those reports in with your ordinance that you must provide, a water management plan, a water conservation plan, and then staff can review for that individual facility. Maybe if you're in the industrial area, maybe that is water cooling may be the right way to go. I mean, certainly the air cooling, is a different approach, but ultimately setting up the rules so that your staff, as they're evaluating, when you get your staff report for any one individual project, they're able to advise the commission as to their views on whether it's an appropriate use or not. It certainly is one of those things that we see quite a bit. I mean, where if you do go to the air, if you do go, I'm going to speak very broadly now. If you go to an air cooled system, there's no question that the amount of water that's needed on the facility or on the area is much more reduced. And so if that is a decision that the commission wishes to take, then, you're certainly going to reduce the amount of water. There is going to still be water required, but it would be far less than a water cooled.
Could I ask a quick question? When you have water, you set policy and you have plans that are submitted at the front side of an application. What are the checks and balances that you've seen in other communities that have regulations to make sure that they are in fact doing what they said on the application side? So are there annual checks and balances or reports that are reviewed, or what have you seen in different areas?
Yeah, so Commissioner, I think it's whether it's the water issue or some of the other issues that have been raised. I mean, the issues that the group have raised are very common right across the United States, in fact, around the world for these data centers. So the air pollution, the noise pollution, all of the other things. And I think, again, especially, and I'm going to speak to Sedgwick County right now, again, with having the staff that you have in place, and then if you're reviewing any one individual, and I apologize, is it a CUP or an SUP in your county, a conditional use permit or, yeah, okay, CUP in this county. So when, if somebody was to apply under a CUP, and then not only, of course, you go through the planning commission, it comes then to you as commissioners, there's a number of conditions that can be put on that conditional use permit. And some of those, Commissioner, can be, the checks and balances that you're asking for, so that the only way that they can continue to operate that facility is, doing it in accordance to the CUP. You could have you could require an annual water report being provided to the commission and that staff can review. You can, there's a whole number of, any one of these individual issues. Things like on the air pollution side, those permits are required by KDHE for the generator. In fact, there's very little air pollution that comes from a facility like this, and really is restricted to the backup diesel generators that may be having to be co-located at the facility. Those require permit under KDHE. So for anybody under the Kansas Department of Environment or Health and Environment, KDHE has to issue that permit. Or things like the stormwater and, retention, detention ponds, stormwater management plans during construction, those all require KDHE permits, and KDHE is responsible. Doesn't preclude your staff from being able to go in and check and balance it. The other thing we see in some counties across the country is that you can require, a reasonable amount of upfront finance from the developer for the county to hire third party. If your staff don't, and again, you happen to be in a position where you have quite a large staff here, but you can require, some sort of, throw out a number, but for third-party consultants that are hired by the county in order to review the plans and that, because your staff there may be something unique for your staff that they haven't reviewed here. So there's a whole number of checks and balances, and it's certainly as you write your ordinance up, I mean, similar to your solar ordinance, for example, where you have some checks and balances in there. But I mean, ultimately, if the company is not abiding by their conditional use permit, they're simply not operating within the bounds of the law. To not be the lawyer, but they're just not operating with the permit. You have that ultimate authority as a county.
My question, I guess I was wondering, the air cooled, my understanding is it shifts the water usage to then the energy creation. So I think Mike can speak better to that. If we go to air cool, does that shift the water use to energy generation?
There's a trade-off. Water's tight, and one thing I'd say about all the pushback on the industry right now is they're changing. That's how industry works. My industry did the same thing. Anytime you push on them, they'll get smart and they'll figure it out because they want to take the easy way first. So it's just economics. That's not like on the water. One of the things we'd like to see in policy and all that, Mr. Howe, is those requirements for an application of a water study, a geological study, a soil study. What are your planned usages? And we will cap you on that. I mean, and one of the things you got to watch out for is people use averages. You need to know what the peak usage will be, particularly if in the summer. How do you want to design? It's a trade-off. Put more equipment, I use more energy, I won't use water, but if I don't want that, I use supplemental evaporative cooling or adiabatic coolers. There's always trade-offs. So that's the kind of things in the policy we need to talk about is you can require the generalization closed loop or new technology. You could put a PUE factor in power utilization efficiency that the industry likes to talk about. They're around 1.6, 1.7 generally. Talk about do it 1.3, even the one that's still in development. That's still to come, 2-phase and all that. I even know that because I built a pilot plant for it. So, but my point is, the regulations, you got to get into there. You've got to develop those. You got to use the history. And the reason we use other studies is we're learning from them because there's a lot of remorse out there and said we would have done it differently.
Right.
Yeah, and be upfront, but it goes to every one of those in the regs. What you want up front and what they need to share. And they can report monthly what they're wanting to see.
Oh, sure, Mike, I would just, again, back to your point. I mean, yes, I mean, there's all sorts of ways you can report things. But again, a water usage study, a groundwater, like if you're going to be pulling from the groundwater, then you need a hydrogeologic study and everything else. And in terms of, no, I mean, when you have the professional and, like being a chemical engineer, right? When you have a third-party engineering firm doing those studies, they're not going to be just monkeying around trying to sort of one average. I mean, they're going to be done to the professional standards of those engineers. And that's where I was saying back in the ordinance, I couldn't agree with you more. If depending on the type of studies, then the commission can look at through staff and staff's deliberation on what this ordinance may look like. Absolutely, I would encourage you. You're going to have a geotech study one way or another because you put a very large building on a piece of ground. But so all of those studies can be done. The one thing I guess I would caution commission is there, as you folks well know, in anything you have in ordinance, there's kind of what you need to deal with and regulate. There's the things that, as I was saying before, KDHE regulates, and then there's things that, even are federal regulation, some of the stuff. And I think I would focus on, often when we look at other infrastructure projects or energy projects, you may have the catch-all ordinance in there and requiring all other state, federal permits that you don't want to have staff have to go through it. You want to have the reports and you want to have the signed letter from KDHE and whoever. So I think, having those reports, certainly having access and kind of back to the transparency point, those should all be public.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
question.
Sure.
How would you address NEPA in?
Okay. But before we switch gears, I know Paul was trying to get in. Paul, are you still online with us?
I am. It was to a comment earlier about the generators for the facility, and they're characterized as diesel generators, and the projects we're working on have a preference for gas. And so we just want to make it clear that that as they're designing these centers, they're going with the latest technologies. I also wanted to offer that the State Water Office is developing an outline of what that water conservation plan should look like under SB 98. It's not completed yet, but when it is, it'll be a public document.
Okay, back to you.
I got a question for. So you're talking about generation, Evergy's generation, or the generators that are on site for backup?
Sorry, what are you asking?
I'm
Paul?
asking
Oh, yeah.
Paul.
I'm sorry, I missed the question. The microphone wasn't picking it up.
Okay, are you asking, were you addressing the gas for the Evergy's generation plant, which I understand you're putting in natural gas, everybody does, or are you addressing the generators at the data centers?
The generators at the data centers.
Yeah, Because the application I just read from February again this year was asking for almost 200 diesel generators in Indiana. And I've seen them elsewhere. And the reason is it's a supply chain issue. It's hard to get natural gas generators because they're not just going to be an internal combustion engine. There's probably going to be a turbine in some type. But so that's still in the plan with these current plans. I've been reading environmental permits. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, Mike. So, I mean, again, and for commissioners, like, just to be clear, right? So what I mean, there's a term in when we're talking about data centers is if you've seen one data center, you've seen one data center, right? And so that, you know, so obviously certain companies have the kind of design that they go with and like, but there's some kind of overarching, and I'm just going to make some generalizations here back to Mike's point is, you know, if we separate what's the load of energy, where's that energy coming from what's actually going to be on the site? Because I think, again, for you folks, there's all sorts of policy around. They have to bring their own energy. They have to do all these things. I don't think that needs to be in the ordinance itself. That's somebody else's problem. Question is, what are you permitting on the site? And it is true that the vast majority of certainly the larger scale, hyperscale, call them whatever you want, the large data centers do in fact have a bank of diesel generators often. And so I'm going to overjump, do have backup diesel generators because this is critical infrastructure that cannot go down. Now, those diesel generators are not designed to run for 30 days, 60 days, 3 months, you know, whatever. They're really meant to be, if they lose power to the facility, that you've got the backup diesel generators. And you're right, Mike, there's, you know, usually it's several hundred, depending on the size of the facility. And they come on, just like, you know, again, I come from a long line of farmers. We have the diesel generator on the farm in case something goes down because it's a milking parlor and the cow's still got to be milked, right? You turn over that diesel generator once a month to make sure it's still operational. That's typically what will happen at a facility. Again, all governed by KDHE, where you're going to turn it over once a month, and then maybe it might operate for, let's say, 12 hours, 6 hours, 4 hours in an outage. Those things have to be taken into account.
Can I ask, do you have an environmental concern with that monthly use of testing? Do you, as someone who does environmental work, do you have an environmental concern with that, the emissions?
No. So under KDHE and the air quality permitting that happens, again, really the only air emission from the site would be the occasional use of the generators. In order to get the permit from KDHE, they have to apply and be able to meet at the fence line standards, stringent air pollution controls standards. Typically a diesel generator, it's not nitrogen dioxide, your bigger one. It's a very short-term intermittent use. And even if it was to run for the 24 hours and the like, and that's where the permit actually for KDHE, you have to supply an air quality modeling exercise. It goes to the KDHE air quality staff. They review it. And the intention there is that no offsite home would be impacted even under the sort of a longer duration, 24-hour, let's say, duration of use. And the permit is issued as such, so that they have to be able to meet those stringent air quality standards. If they can't, I mean, there's also, back to the technology side, there are all sorts of diesel generators one could buy out there. These are not, you know, kind of go to Home Depot and grab the quick little one off the shelf that will just barf out all sorts of crap for 24 hours. They are governed, and, you know, there's pretty serious pollution control. But again, those are things where I would suggest, I mean, you're looking at the site plans and that, but in terms of who needs to permit that side, I would say, you know, in the ordinance, I would say, and must have KDHE approval, for example.
Can I ask a question?
The point, except that they're classified as an emergency generator. They are not under the same regulations that you would for an on-site purpose generator regarding abatement of any NOxes and that, or bag houses. And I've seen the ones that they've been talking about. So
Mike, that's not entirely, you're right in the fact that they're emergent, but the air quality standards for those, it's not that they're any more lax. It's when we look at the potential impact on people from air quality issue, there's the long-term. So for example, if you get a permit a natural gas plant that's going to be operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 a year, then we're protecting for long-term health. We're protecting over the course of the entire year. When we're looking at kind of emergency backup generator use, the standards are a little higher only because the health impacts, really what we're talking about is inflammation of asthma, of that. Those numbers actually have to be quite a bit higher from a very short-term use to actually elicit that health impact. So they are still very stringent standards. It's just purpose fit for the duration and time. And those KDHE standards align with the EPA's national ambient air quality standards.
there are different standards for emergency versus
Right, because again, it's a very short-term
you have
use.
to understand that. Yeah, 2 or 300.
And again, but having all 300 or 200 operating at the exact same time, you still have to, at the fence line, meet those permitted conditions.
Well, yeah, I was just curious. There are several of us who live within a half mile of these sites. Do you want to raise your children? Do you want me to move my children when they're running them for those emergency 24 hours or 3 days or whatever it is? Would you feel safe having your children directly abut it to this facility for those emergency hours?
So,
Do you think that's fair to the homeowners that are already there?
so Caitlin, I mean, I think the answer is yes, of course it is, or I wouldn't be here because of the science that we have behind those. I mean, I certainly understand, I have two young daughters as well. Okay. So the question is, if they weren't going to have to get the permit, if they could just do whatever they wanted on the site, no. But because they have to be under KDHE, right? So it's your health department is looking at health and environment department has those same standards, whether it's, it met right across the state, regardless of the use, regardless of whether it's a data center or something else. I think it, comes back to Commissioner Howell's point later or earlier that we can kind of get it. So what regulations there are some local county regulations you should have in place as well that are not then governed by the state. Things like your noise standard, some other setback distances, what's an appropriate setback. And I'm happy to discuss some of those. But, yes, I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, with any ordinance planning, it's that balance between, from at least from my role in the public health and safety side, it's what is appropriate to ensure and not, for whether it's your children, anybody else's children, for everybody in the community, whether it's one home or let's say it's going into an area, we have data centers where we have entire residential communities, thousands of people living around them. So it's whether it's one person or thousands, that everybody is protected, that nobody's public health, safety and welfare, the quality of life was brought up, that those aren't going to be impacted. So then so what are the rules? What should they be? What are the things at the county? What should staff, and I'm sure staff's already been diving into this. I'm happy for any of those ones if you wanted to kind of get into what those would be. But in terms of air quality, if the generators come on, KDHE rules are there to protect. So if your child's my youngest daughter's childhood asthma, it's to protect people like her if it was right at the fence line.
I want to steer the conversation a little bit to more globally and everyone in Sedgwick County, and I want to do that through electric rates. So I've heard two different stories. I just came from National Association of Counties. A month or two ago, I talked to this county commissioner. It's been a commissioner for 30 years in Ohio. And he starts talking about data centers and he tells me, you guys are where we were 15 years ago. And he's telling me their rates are doubling and tripling. He said, but it may not affect you like that because we didn't have a protective tariff. So whenever I hear from Evergy, you're actually showing me where, well, a data center would help build infrastructure and they're paying $1.25 for what we're paying $1 for. And it would essentially help level off some rates. So hearing two different stories. I don't know, Ebony, if you want to try to take that one.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I will just, I didn't get a chance to introduce Jason earlier. He's online. Jason is our Senior Director of External Affairs. Hi, Jason. And he was very instrumental in helping us draft some of the language to the new LLPS. So I'll let him kind of explain the protections that are put in place and how the data centers actually pay a premium for coming online. Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Ebony. Hopefully you guys can hear me all right. Your comment about Ohio is exactly correct, is because when Paul said earlier that we were kind of on the tail end of data center development, that we've used that time to understand what the problem is and how to address it. So the first thing to know is that data centers pay 100% of the costs for use that they are causing in terms of infrastructure. So by way of example, in Missouri, which is ahead of Kansas in terms of data centers, I have several data centers that are paying tens of millions of dollars in costs. It's their costs that they are covering. The concern came to be the generation that they are causing. It's causing us to build generation. How do we protect customers from that so that the data center, or large load in this case, is paying that share? So what we did is we went to the KCC, the Kansas Corporation Commission, and filed for a new tariff known as the LLPS, Large Load Power Service. This applies to every project that is 75 megawatts or larger. This is going to be, most of your large data centers will fall under this. And frankly, some of your large manufacturing facilities will fall under this. But they are not, 5 years ago, I would have given a data center a discount. They no longer get a discount. They don't even pay the same rate as the other tier ones. They pay 15 to 20% higher. And the reason they do that is they pay that premium to make sure they're paying more of that. What we do with that is that when we go into a rate case, we give that extra revenue to all of the other non-LLPS customers to make sure that they are paying that generation costs and it's coming for them. We also have several other terms in effect. There's a minimum term length. So it's 17 years. You get 5 years to ramp up and then another 12 years of contract to be on the system. Today, there's not a single other customer that has any sort of protection. Any of them can walk tomorrow. These will have 17-year protections to make sure they're on the system. They will have a minimum monthly bill. What that means is that if they say they're going to use 200 megawatts, but they only use 100 megawatts, they're still going to pay for that 200 megawatts. It's called take it or pay. It's making sure that they don't make commitments and then back out of them, and we have to, and then it hurts our customers. The other thing that we have, of course, termination of fees, all those types of things, and then collateral. I'm less concerned about some of the large, tech companies that you all know. They have big balance sheets. I am concerned, though, if I see somebody who is, an LLC, if it's Joe's LLC, I want to make sure that they have the financial wherewithal that should something go wrong, they can still meet their commitments. So we ask for those collateral positions. This was agreed to by every stakeholder at the KCC. So whether it was the low income advocate, whether it was the industrials were at the table, along with many of the other folks that do this. I mean, there was a comment earlier about regulation, and I think that is a good point that, there are a lot of energy regulations that we follow, starting with the KCC, but it does not end there. It's the alphabet soup of federal agencies that overlook us, from FERC to NERC to probably things I don't even know about. So we are highly regulated. One of the differences between Ohio and Kansas, or even New Jersey and Virginia, which is where I think you see this problem, is those are deregulated states. That means that they are not regulated by a KCC like we are in Kansas. And so one of the problems that they experience is that in those states, there is absolutely direct competition with data centers when they're buying their energy on the market. In Kansas, we don't have that issue. Remember, if I'm going to change my prices, I have to go in front of the Kansas Corporation Commission and ask for that. I can't it's not something that I say, oh, it's a hot day, we're going to charge more. We don't have that ability to do that. They do in a deregulated state, but in a regulated state, we don't have that ability. So sometimes the nuance when you hear from different states might just be the type of regulation they have there in that local state. So that's the only other thing I want to talk about, since you did bring up electric rates, is I do want to also touch on, sometimes what I'll hear from folks is they'll say, well, we're going to have more brownouts, or we're going to have this, we don't have the energy. As a regulated utility, Evergy cannot hook up any project unless I have the native generation to meet their peak load plus another 15% reserve margin. So today I have the native load to back all of my generation plus that 15% reserve margin for the summer. It will be the same going forward. So we will not be in any, if you think we're in danger tomorrow, well, then we're in the same danger today, because it is the same policy. I have to have the native load plus a reserve margin to do that.
Paul, you got a question, or Mike got a question about?
Just Mike, the question I have is, and I understand it's very good to put the reg about they pay for that. That's mostly the capital structure. Anything that goes with it. With the data center growth from 4% of the US usage to 8 to 12, some say as high as 17% by 2030. And most of the natural gas generation, or most of the generation going in, is going to be natural gas. It's quicker and stuff like that, even though you have pretty. What do you envision what's going to happen with the variable cost of electricity, because the demand on natural gas and the price of natural gas will go up with more demand? You protected the fixed asset capital investment. Is the tariff going to cover any of the variable costs it's going to go up? And I'll give you an example.
Well,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's the problem with any input, right? Like, so we would see the same thing with coal. Coal prices, when the federal government started highly regulating them, went up. So yes, fuel prices are an input. I'm like a farmer in that instance, right? I'm a taker of the price. And so, yeah, whether natural gas goes up or coal goes up, I would just say to you though, that is saying Wichita or any part of Kansas saying, well, we're not going to do data centers, that's not going to insulate you from prices going up, right? Because if, to your point, if there are other places putting in data centers that's causing those costs to go up, we're going to bear them the same in Kansas as anywhere else, just not get any of the benefits.
Right, and that is actually my point. It's you're going to have a lot of discussion. There's going to be inflationary because just the supply and demand, and that demand is going to go up. 43% of all electricity generated in the United States, it's going to go higher. So that's just a fact of life. So I think we need to be very clear. We're protecting ourselves and investment, the capital investment, but that other one, and it's hard to track, but nobody's growing at the rate data centers, of course.
Yeah.
Okay. Nobody's growing.
Thank you, Jason. Ebony, thank you for that. I have one really specific question. These large load tariffs that you're putting in, could you emphatically say that it's not going to raise rates on other citizens and some of your other customers here? I mean, is this enough to prevent rate increases for the rest of the users?
So let's be clear about a couple things. I did not say there would be no rate increases going forward, and here's why. We are in the gentleman's point is correct in terms of infrastructure. So again, I'm a price taker. So when I'm buying steel, I'm buying wood, the poles and wires have gone up 200% since 2020. I've got a list of inputs. The lowest one has gone up 36% since 2020. The highest one has gone up 238% 2020. So regardless of data centers, when I'm buying inputs, they're going to go up. But the LLPS is going to hold us harmless from this. And let me give you one other protection here. Because this is a tariff, it is not a special contract. It is not a fixed price. If the KCC looks at this and says it didn't do what it was supposed to, they need to pay more. The KCC has the ability to do that.
Sure.
So from an infrastructure standpoint, they're covered. From a generation standpoint, we believe it will do that. If it doesn't, the KCC will come back and say, actually, you guys, your modeling was wrong on this. The price needs to go up.
That makes sense, Jason. My next question, it's my last question on the energy piece of it is, I appreciate all that Evergy is doing in this regard, but there are more energy providers than Evergy in Sedgwick County. I'm a personal customer of Sedgwick County Co-op. These same co-ops, are they also playing by these same rules? That is Evergy the only one that is supplying power for data centers throughout Sedgwick County? Or how does the co-ops work in this too? Can anybody help me with that? It may not be your place, but can anybody help me understand that?
Well, first, the first thing I would say is, commissioners, we could get you in the Evergy service territory. I feel like you'd be a highly valuable customer. But no, co-ops are not regulated by the KCC. So they are their own organizations that are governed by their own set of rules. So whether I could not tell you, I'm not familiar with what the co-ops plans are when it comes to data centers.
Okay, got about a comment on that. You took my question there, but I wanted to follow up with that. And that was one of my concerns too, is the co-op, if it's not subject to this large load rate, then what happens with them, right? That means the citizens are still going to be impacted by that. But I also wanted to just ask a question. So I assume Evergy is currently building out infrastructure and maybe even power plants in anticipation of data centers coming. Is that correct?
Yes, you are correct. As you guys, I think, probably know, there's a natural gas facility going into the southwest of you there in Viola in Sumner County, as well as up in Hutchinson. So yes, there are, in order to be able to meet that demand that's coming, those are under construction.
So I guess my question, my follow-up on that is, does that mean that we now have to get data centers in our area to be able to pay for that? Because otherwise the taxpayer is going to be on the hook for that, I would imagine. So it's like we're going to build for it, and if they don't come, then what happens is one of the questions. So I'll let you answer that one first.
Yeah, so actually those generation assets that you're talking about, we already have customers coming online as well with those. So this is not we're not building it in speculation. We announced a couple weeks ago some more data centers that are coming to Kansas City. We've also had, and as well as Kansas, we've had a couple others that are doing plus ups. So when we build generation, we build it with kind of having those customers in mind. We are not speculatively building.
And I think if I might, sorry, if I might, Mr. Chair, just from a national policy perspective, and I think everybody heard like right after the State of the Union, the president announced that large load data centers would be bringing their own new build generation. And one of the reasons the president's able to make that statement is, and again, I'm not going to speak for the entire industry, but the large load data centers, that, you know, all the alphabet soup names that you saw there before, we're already doing that. And what we see here in Kansas or other states, you're seeing them commit. So it doesn't mean, and one of the things that would, a reason I raise it here is that it doesn't mean that they're new. So if they're going to have a 500 megawatt data center, they need 500 megawatts of energy. It does not, I don't want the county to think that then all of a sudden that 500 megawatts would be generated here in the county. Some counties are, right? So you've got some data centers where you're going to have co-location of wind, solar, a natural gas plant, battery storage, whatever have you. And that may occur right there in the county, right, you know, adjacent. But that's not necessarily the case. And you have your own regulations already in place for those other types of energy infrastructure. So I think, you know, a lot of the offset here is that they are bringing their own energy as well. And then for the co-ops, I think that that's a discussion with the co-op. I mean, your individual co-ops are going to be having those discussions, of course, with the, if that's where it is with the data centers, if they're coming in.
About 25 minutes left. I want to touch base a little bit on some of the positives. I want to lean a little bit on Tanya, Kevin, and Chris. Tanya, could you get into IXP a little bit with us?
Sure. So the state of Kansas has invested $5 million towards the building of the state's first internet exchange point. It'll be a neutral exchange point, meaning that no carrier owns it. It is owned by a non-carrier. So the prices will be at a wholesale rate for everyone. So there'll be no cross-connect fees. What that means is we will have access to the internet and exchanges that we've never before. All of our internet traffic currently across the entire state backhauls out of the state of Kansas before it hits the internet, either at 1102 Grand in Kansas City, Missouri, or in Dallas or Denver. So what that means, regardless of a data center being here, what that means for us is that we have the opportunity to keep our data traffic local in our state. So that when I put a request in somewhere, it can go and hit that internet exchange point, go directly to where it needs to, and come back to me and stay right within our state. We can also do local peering. So the broadband traffic and internet traffic will change in our state. We are one of 14 states in the nation that doesn't yet have an internet exchange point. For example, Dallas-Fort Worth, I think they have 18 internet exchange points in their city alone. It doesn't count all of what is in Texas. So this will be, you know, a very big dramatic change for the opportunity for transmission of data. It also is part of a much larger investment by the state of Kansas. And this was all funded by BEAD dollars from the federal government, the broadband money that was put out several years ago. The Free State Middle Mile is another large investment by the state of Kansas's broadband office. That is brand new fiber, about 700 miles of fiber that connects the internet exchange point at 1102 Grand in Kansas City, Missouri, to the internet exchange point in Wichita. It also meanders through the state some and hits several rural areas. The Kansas Department of Transportation was key in developing and building out the basis for where that maps. In Sedgwick County, there are several large new routes of fiber that will be built as part of the Free State Middle Mile. In fact, maybe you've seen some of that traffic and activity around because we've had a lot of digging locally. I know in my area, some digging. So all of that, regardless of a data center, will actually help us when the internet gets more congested, as the internet gets more congested with operational technology traffic. What I mean by that is all of the sensors that are working on the internet, like your watch, Your phone, every bit of all of the cameras and all of the things that are at all of the companies in our city and our hospitals and our schools, that track activity, that all goes on the internet. And when we can keep that traffic local and expand the opportunity, that helps a lot. When we talk about AI or agentic traffic, that's a whole nother layer of activity that is on the internet. So in general, this is going to help create more bandwidth for everyone, create redundant bandwidth so that if one thing gets cut, right now, if our connection to 1102 Grand in Missouri got cut, we would go dark. Yeah, we would have to fail over to, Dallas or Denver, and that would cause lots and lots of traffic congestion. And you've seen that in the news, over time. So again, the Free State Middle Mile and the Internet Exchange Point are both things that the state of Kansas has directed hundreds of millions of dollars in investment.
If I can ask a follow-up, Joe. All right, Tanya, the data center conversation. What is your thought here as to why Sedgwick County needs to be more forward-thinking in data centers? Can you help justify? I understand the IXP. And thank you, by the way, for all the work you're doing at the IXP. Talk to us about why you feel these things are connected and why the data center is necessary for Sedgwick County.
Sure. So what I am pro about is planning and strategy to participate in the digital economy. The digital economy is here. It is the backbone of all of our businesses. It's the backbone of all of our community services. It's the backbone of our education, our healthcare, our city. Everything that's happening is digital. We can't get out of that. Okay? There are very few services that you can participate in anymore without utilizing, digital applications, digital tools. I would very much like for Sedgwick County Commissioners, and I'm glad that you have spent the time that you have, to be forward thinking in our strategy. And instead of responding to individual projects and concern like the Renwick group has had to do, that we have a very, very well thought out plan of what we would like to have. Not just what we don't want to have, but what would we like to have? What would help us? And that doesn't just mean what do we want from whether we want a data center or not, but it means if we would agree to a data center and it would follow all of the permitting and policies and everything that we've put into place, what community benefits agreements are we expecting? I would like us to have a draft of a community benefits agreement publicly available. And these are the things we expect. If we are going to partner with a large hyperscale data center, then and give some of our resources, then we expect these specific resources back. Not just permitting. I mean, and I don't say that lightly, because everything that you guys have brought up, I care about too. This is why I choose to live here. It's why I've continued to live in Kansas, in Wichita and Sedgwick County, because I love the environment, and I care a lot about our community. But on top of that, we should be proactive. We should not be sitting at any discussion or any table without well thought out strategy and plans ahead of time. Okay, we're behind the 8 ball when we're reacting and things, just like Mike has said. Mike and John and I have had several long discussions about this. When you don't know and there are terms and all, it just puts you in a frenzy, right? It's not the way we want to respond. I would strongly urge the county to put together a subject matter expert group that can address each of these concerns and help us make sure that we have the right policies in place ahead of time, but they line up in a bigger strategy. That we understand that in order to stay, economically viable in rural America, that we have everything that we need. Everything that we need. To me, this is another generational opportunity for us to make decisions that set the pace for the next generations to come. 30 years ago when the internet first came, I was part of those discussions as well. And I can remember I had a keynote address that I gave all over Kansas, and it was right after Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat, came out. And it was all about, the global economy. And my keynote was, the world is flat and so is Kansas. Are we ready? Okay. And it was all about, are we ready? Okay. Sedgwick School District was one of the leaders in the nation to bring in wireless technology and laptops in the classroom and utilize laptops to save so much money on outdated textbooks and put the education of those children scads ahead. Okay, so in rural Kansas 30 years ago, we did things that everybody was looking at us. And that's what we could do today. We are a little behind. Okay, but the best way to go from that to ahead is just to leapfrog and to work on the remorse and the problems that have already been documented, and to put the best things we can forward that have some legs. Okay, so I would not refer to any specific technologies. Those technologies will be outdated tomorrow. What we need to refer to are our water, our land, our noise, our lights, the things that are constant. How do we want those consumed, and what do we want out of a partnership? The things I would want if I were able to do it is I would want our partners to invest in our communities. I would want them to invest in our everything that we need: healthcare, education, workforce. I want every kid to have a job in Kansas that they want and to stay here. I know that kids want to leave. Several of mine have. I don't think we'll be able to keep them all, but I certainly don't want a kid to leave because they couldn't find the job that they wanted to have for their career. Does that help you, Ryan?
Yeah, Tanya, I appreciate that. That was very good. Very similar to what you said at the REIT meeting, which was very good. We had a gentleman from DeSoto. His name was Kevin. I can't remember his last name. We had a Mr. Doyle from Prairie, Oklahoma. Very good presentations that they give. I was, after we did a bunch of investigation on it, I'm kind of like Mr. Howell, really like get to the point. Those were industrial areas and both brownfield facilities. You're not going to put a daycare center there, nor will you put a school there. You're not going to put a water park there. You're going to try to utilize that ground versus just letting the mowers mow the grass, right? So there are brownfield facilities in industrial areas, which is something I think we would all agree with, but not we're opposed to have anything in an agriculture area, as you stated in the county meeting and as you stated at the REIT meeting. The REIT meeting was very good. Someday I would love to be part of that group as a business owner, but my point was it was just a little misleading to everybody in that meeting that these were industrial areas, even though Mr. Doyle did say they're the 5th largest industrial area in the nation, but those are brownfield sites.
So that's what I mean by a strategy. We should identify where we want data centers. When people come to our state, they don't know us. They just start knocking on doors and they go to FRG first or to the power, and they find out where is power. And then they start hunting from there and they knock on people's doors, and the landowners that they knock on don't know all of this either. So that's where I would like to have some help for everyone. For our landowners, for our businesses, for everyone to put together a strategy so that Kansas doesn't say, we've got to think about it for 3 years. We say, we've thought about it. And this is where you can talk to us. Like these are for sure, sit at the table. You're going to follow all of this and you're going to pay this and you're going to be a part, this is where it starts. Right. And I don't mean we can't ask even more than that. That's not what I mean. But also knowing that the state has already put several policies and permitting in place that, again, a lot of this isn't just for data centers. We have large manufacturing plants that have serious amounts of power and water pollution and, all kinds of things. So this isn't new to us. Okay, it really isn't. We should look at the things that the state is already requiring, not as the ceiling, but as the table stakes. This is entry. We should require that all of those documents are shared with us right? So that it's all very transparent. And when I say require these are not hard things. These are just things to write in a strategy, that everything that KDHE has already agreed on, we have access to that, and we might even ask for more, right? And, to Stephanie's point, part of it is not just asking ahead of time, it's the follow-up, right? So that costs money, right? That costs money for us to follow up and pay attention and hold people accountable. So that's part of the regulation and that's part of the partnership. If we need to, have more experts to help us with this, then we put that in the policy. To me, all of this can be, put in a policy. The other thing I'd urge us is it won't be something we put on the shelf, and we're done. This will be something that we have to attend to. This is, something that we have to continue to watch. And if you're in the tech business like we are, this isn't new either. Every day it's something, new and it changes. And so, none of this do I take lightly. But what I want is for Kansas and Sedgwick County to be proactive and for people to look to us because we're leaders. We have such smart people here. You guys, when you introduce yourself, I'm like, we have all these smart people that are going to take 2 hours out of their day just to discuss this. I'm positive that we can put an expert group together to help make these decisions and that, you guys can be transparent with us and, help us create the policy that will move us towards the future.
And Mr. Chair, if I might just one brief point to Joe's point, certainly there are large scale data centers that are built in industrial commercial corridors as well as on brownfield sites. These do take, 1,000 acres, give or take 500 acres. There are also, in actual fact, there are probably more data centers that are being built now in rural, on the outskirts of communities or rural areas, such as in Sedgwick County here, potentially. If you look at that, as my view would be, as long as you've got the right rules in place, again, through your ordinance on setbacks, sound, all of the, requiring Army Corps of Engineer for wetlands, wildlife and park for species at risk, all of those different things, having an emergency response plan that you're working with the local fire chief and the like, having all those rules in place. So regardless of whether it goes into an industrial corridor, I don't know if Wichita has an industrial park big enough or if it's going to go into a rural area, making sure that you've got the rules in place so that regardless if Sedgwick County chooses to go down this route, you still can locate them in areas outside of industrial brownfield corridors.
Okay. About 7 minutes left. Yeah. Caitlin, I'm going to lean on you and I'm going to ask you guys to just give us brief topics that you don't believe that we hit today. You got satisfactory answers, and hopefully by the planning meeting next Tuesday, the staff will have some answers. So
I think this was a great start to the discussion. Again, I think it's just a start. And I think everything that was just said and shared by Tanya and Dr. Olson is great. I actually hope that we move forward from this and really look at how we continue to address this. Are we addressing this? Is this the right approach? As we've kind of mentioned, these small pauses, is that causing more rush than is necessary? If we step back, slow down a little bit more, would we get a better response from the community? Will we get more feedback that we need? That's what I heard you express is we need more feedback. We need to create these regulations. And in my opinion, that takes finding the professionals, which I think we're in the process of doing, bringing them together and ensuring that they can spend the time to do that. So I think I would like to hear more on the noise aspect and setbacks for that, how that might affect communities. I think I would like to hear more on water use, both in the facility itself and potentially in energy generation, and how that affects our overall comprehensive plan. I'll let anybody else step in here what they would like to hear more on.
Sure.
Yeah, I would like to hear more on the infrastructure, the roads. We've read so much information on all these different states and the accidents that are happening. I mean, we're talking county roads out here. You got we're not talking specific sites, but it'd be basically one school zone from one town to the next town. Also with the lake traffic, we talked about the water conservation too. I mean, how much water is being pulled out of Cheney Lake today versus out of the aquifer. That's a big concern as well. So I think Caitlin, you hit most of the points as well.
You know, I think just, the property values are a big thing for us too, because those are definitely going to be impacted by this. You put them in rural communities like that. I mean, again, these hyperscales are such unprecedented in size and scope. So it's something new to us. We don't have anything around here like this. In fact, even the power requirements of these, I think the largest one in Kansas is 100 megawatts right now. And I know one of the facilities that I've heard about that they're looking out west is 1 gigawatts, 10 times that. So, what's it take to service something like that? And can we even do it? And what are the ramifications of that? And again, the technology is changing so fast. What you build today, what might be obsolete in 10 or 15 years. Then what do you do? I like to know, I'll talk about this whole obsolescence piece. What do you do with these things at the end of the life of these? Or if the technology changes, those big buildings and all that infrastructure aren't needed anymore. They're in somewhere else. Elon Musk is talking about putting them in space. Nothing's out of the question anymore, right? As far as what could happen with that. And then really the AI bubble, I know we didn't talk about today, but that is a real thing that a lot of economists are hitting on, saying that, there's so much money being spent now, $650 billion this year. So you think about where's the return on that and what can happen. So that's a scary thing to think about, because there are a lot of them predicting that there's going to be a big slowdown here or a correction, right, on these, that they're going to be a couple years out. And then what happens with something that's halfway built and somebody pulls out? So those are some other additional concerns.
I just make a comment real quick. This is John Heck. Just piggybacking a little bit on what Pat said, but as all of us, and I'm sure all of you have been studying that this is a new data center. This is a new animal, and we need to do it right. Take the time to do it right. That's probably the biggest point I would try to emphasize, is that there's a lot of questions out there. There's a lot of things you don't know. We need to collaborate. We need to work together, because we need to do what's best for the area.
Steve, you got anything for us in conclusion?
Yes, thank you. Fascinating discussion. I think, commissioners, you've got a really interesting set of folks who brought some really interesting concerns to light that surely you've heard of before. And I think if we can satisfy those, maybe we can turn this group from no data centers to maybe data centers, and then maybe smart data centers. I think that'd be a win for the county and for this economic region. I think we're all pro economic development for South Central Kansas. That's smart. I also think that Wichita and Sedgwick County needs to lead that economic development. If it grows in Hutch, that's fine. If it grows in other places, that's fine. But I think they're going to be looking to Sedgwick County to lead, and to lead smartly. So I think it's great what they brought up, and I'd love to touch base with a couple of you guys later for some follow-on questions.
Joe, I'll get to you in just a second, but I do want to make one comment that, Commissioner Meister likes to make. You guys remember the casino vote we had several years ago, and, one city area says no, and then, it reminds me of Father Bernie calling me, keep it out of Sedgwick County. I'm like, well, your church is in Reno. Yeah, I'll keep it out of there too. And I'm like, well, but anyway, go ahead, Joe.
With all the research everybody has done, one thing we cannot find anywhere is what's the ROI on these data centers. Any investment, anytime you buy equipment, you buy a building, you're investing in anything in this county, this state, you want to show what's your return on investment. There is nothing on these, zero. I've never found one thing on ROI.
You mean if they're not publicly sharing their ROI?
Yeah, I mean, but besides the trillions of dollars that are going to the tech companies, but I'm just saying, if you look really trying to find an ROI on one of these, it's really hard to find.
You mind, Chairman? Because I get that question a lot. There are people that work in data centers that do data center technology. Is there a return on investment? That
one thing, maybe if I might, Commissioner, and back to Commissioner Howell's point first, and I'm not discounting that question, but bring it back to the ordinance here for a second. I mean, there's this discussion of what are you going to do with the buildings when they're done and everything else. I think very similar what we see across the country in ordinances, what we see in your solar ordinance, for example, is the requirement for decommissioning bond posted. That is something that I think should go into the ordinance. That's what protects the county. Whether this thing's good for 5 years, 50 years, or 5,000 years, at the end of the day, your ordinances, as you well know, commissioners, that's how you protect the community. That's how you protect people, that you won't just have warehouse buildings sitting there vacant for the next 50 years. So the again, ordinances don't look at ROI. They don't look at all the other business case side of things. What you're really looking at is trying to put the rules in place. And, you know, if I might just for a second, so back to Caitlin's point, I do think, and I'm sure this is what staff's going to be bringing forward, but things like, you know, what is the appropriate sound limit? Somewhere between 50 and 55 decibels. The staff will be coming with recommendation that that's not new science for that. Setback distances to homes and property lines. You really don't need a large setback to a cornfield, but you certainly want a setback to homes, you know, a half mile, something like that. Requiring all the state and local federal permits, you know, we're Army Corps of Engineers, if it's a wetland, your wildlife and parks for species at risk, you don't need a full environmental assessment. All of those things are in place. I would recommend you get it, that you require an emergency response plan, that then they have to meet with the fire chief and the local district, as well as the regional one for Wichita here, that in the unlikely event that something was to occur, that emergency response plan is in place, the annual training is there for them. Somebody brought up lighting before, a light mitigation plan, right? You don't want this thing lit up like Christmas, so it's glowing everywhere. There are ways that you can do that. You can have a light mitigation plan. So I think, you know, those are the things in the ordinance as you contemplate. So regardless of whether it's in the area of Colwich and you folks anywhere in the county, which of course your ordinance rules and staff for anywhere in the county, there are a number of things. Although data centers are new for this area, we're really talking about just large infrastructure, and the ordinances can vary. Like there's nothing unique, I would say, about the physical nature of the property or anything being emitted from the property that's not, you know, there's no sort of new angled environmental or health issue. It's just, they're all things we know how to deal with. And I'm sure staff will be bringing back appropriate setbacks. Not that everybody will be happy with them, right? Because we all know you folks have done this every solar ordinance, the wind ordinances, all of those. But ultimately, I think, you know, having those rules in place, but the decommissioning bond, I think, would also be key. Coming back to the point, you don't want, you know, these large warehouses sitting up there for 50 years. And again, any of the responsible developers in this area right now know they're going to be having to post decommissioning for you so that the citizens are not protected.
I'd like to address that first. Everything you said is what we're working. Yeah. I want people to understand this group is not no hell no. We're actually saying, what's the right thing to do? Every one of those you said about, we've talked. Yeah. There's a group of us and we've studied the other. Up to Pennsylvania's got a break. And we really do have. So we're addressing every one of those issues in the future. Yep. And there will be debates about the actual numbers. Certainly, I would not accept 55. But there's other issues when you do it. So everything you said is what all concerns are in our research, and we want to be part of that solution. However, this really is.
Yeah, Mike, and agreed.
People understand what our group is really about.
No, and for sure, and all of the issues you put up there, again, those are all valid concerns and valid issues. And I think, you know, as it moves forward, just like it would in any other ordinance planning, you've got, you know, I've heard staff are going to be bringing forward a draft ordinance. It's going to then go in front of planning commission, all of those debates. And then even more so, and back to somebody's point earlier, it's a lot easier to deal with these things in a smaller setting like this, in a working group, as opposed to having to go through a 50-hour meeting at planning and zoning first. Because I think there is a lot of common ground that can be found. And, you know, again, all of the issues you folks have raised are the same issues that we see across the country, and it's very valid, and they should be done. And I was just throwing out some general sound. I'm not saying that they were the right number. Again, that those are very much local numbers.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. We're a little afternoon here. I want to thank the commissioners. I want to thank everybody. You know, everybody in here has got a lot of value, a lot of subject matter expertise. Appreciate everybody. I think it was good dialogue. I guess one thing I would just ask him prior to the planning meeting, if you could just visit with the folks again and let them know we don't want to think of the whole county whenever they bring concerns, not just one specific area, because the regulations will, you guys have done a good job of that today. I just want to make sure that the group understands what, you know, whatever they're asking for may not be in their backyard, you know, so just try to think of the county in a whole. So, all right. Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Chair, my name's actually OLLSON. So this is spelling of an engineering firm that's local as well, but it's not my type of